Operation Ajax. After World War II, the Middle East became the center of the world's energy politics. In Iran, Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh was elected on a platform of independence. His biggest move? Nationalizing the oil industry, until then controlled by the British. For London, this was unacceptable. British Petroleum stood to lose billions, and in Washington, officials saw Mossadegh's nationalism as a door to Soviet influence. So in 1953, the CIA and MI6 launched Operation Ajax. It was a textbook coup d'etat disguised as popular revolt. Propaganda campaigns painted Mossadegh as unstable and communist. Bribes secured the loyalty of generals and politicians. Hired mobs flooded Tehran, sparking riots. Within days, Mossadegh was removed. The Shah returned as absolute monarch, backed by Western powers. For the US and Britain, it was victory. Oil interests were safe, but the cost was hidden. Iran's democracy was destroyed. The Shah's dictatorship ruled with repression, and the memory of this coup festered until 1979, when Iranians overthrew him in the Islamic Revolution. Operation Ajax looked like success on paper. In reality, it poisoned US-Iran relations for generations. Operation PBSUCCESS. In Latin America, Washington's fear of communism met its fear of losing corporate power. Guatemala was a small country, but with a big problem: land inequality. President Jacobo Arbenz sought to change that. He passed agrarian reforms to give land to poor farmers. The obstacle? Much of that land belonged to the United Fruit Company, an American multinational with deep ties in Washington. Arbenz compensated the company based on declared land values, which United Fruit had deliberately undervalued for tax purposes. The company cried theft. The CIA listened. So came Operation PBSUCCESS. The CIA trained and armed Guatemalan exiles in Honduras, but it wasn't brute force that toppled Arbenz. The agency used psychological warfare. Radio broadcasts spread fake reports of advancing rebel armies. CIA aircraft dropped bombs and leaflets, creating panic. Officers believed the U.S. was preparing a full-scale invasion. Arbenz lost the military's loyalty. In June 1954, he resigned and went into exile. The United States celebrated it as another win against communism, but Guatemala paid the price. Decades of dictatorships, coups, and civil war. By the time it ended, more than 200,000 people were dead. A covert action to protect a fruit company became one of Central America's darkest tragedies. Bay of Pigs invasion. In 1959, Fidel Castro overthrew Fulgencio Batista and declared Cuba a socialist revolution. For Washington, the loss was immense. American corporations lost investments, and the U.S. lost its closest Caribbean ally. By 1960, Castro aligned with the Soviet Union. The Cold War had reached the Western Hemisphere. The CIA designed a bold plan: train Cuban exiles, arm them, and launch an invasion to overthrow Castro. This became the Bay of Pigs invasion. 1,400 exiles landed on Cuba's southern coast in April 1961. The plan depended on air support and a local uprising against Castro, but both failed. The exiles were quickly surrounded. The promised airstrikes never materialized. Within 3 days, Castro's forces captured or killed nearly all of them. The result was a humiliation for the Kennedy administration. Instead of removing Castro, the invasion solidified his power. He became a hero of resistance, and Cuba moved even closer to Moscow. The failed invasion was not just an embarrassment. It directly triggered the Cuban Missile Crisis the following year, bringing the world to the edge of nuclear war. The Bay of Pigs became a lesson in how covert operations can backfire spectacularly. Operation Mongoose. The Bay of Pigs disaster did not end U.S. efforts against Castro. In fact, it escalated them. Under President Kennedy, the CIA created Operation Mongoose. Its mission was not just regime change, it was economic sabotage, subversion, and assassination. Factories were targeted for explosions. Crops were poisoned to damage the economy. And a long list of bizarre assassination plots was drawn up. Castro's cigars were laced with poison. His diving suit was contaminated with deadly fungus. Exploding seashells were planned for his favorite beaches. More than 600 attempts on Castro's life have been documented. Every single one failed. Instead of destabilizing Cuba, Operation Mongoose became a symbol of CIA obsession and of Castro's defiance. The Cuban leader survived not only the plots, but also outlived the American presidents who ordered them. Mongoose proved that even a superpower can spend millions, deploy endless resources, and still fail to kill one man. Operation Chaos. The Cold War was not only fought abroad. In the late 1960s, the CIA turned its gaze inward, onto its own citizens. This was Operation Chaos. Officially, its purpose was to track foreign influence on American protest movements. Unofficially, it became mass surveillance of the anti-war left, civil rights activists, and student groups. The CIA compiled files on more than 7,000 individuals and 1,000 organizations. Agents infiltrated demonstrations. Mail was intercepted. Telephones tapped. But there was a problem. The CIA's charter forbade domestic spying. Operation Chaos was illegal from the start. When it was exposed in the 1970s, it fueled public outrage and congressional investigations. The Church Committee revealed the extent of CIA abuses. Impact, trust in government collapsed, and reforms were introduced, at least on paper, to rein in the agency's domestic power. Operation Chaos showed how a tool built for fighting communism abroad could easily be turned against dissent at home. Operation Cyclone. In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. For the CIA, this was an opportunity. If Moscow could be trapped in a long war, it might weaken the Soviet Empire itself. Thus began Operation Cyclone, one of the most expensive covert operations in CIA history. Billions of dollars in weapons and training were funneled to Afghan guerrillas, the Mujahideen. American Stinger missiles allowed them to shoot Soviet helicopters from the sky. Saudi Arabia and Pakistan became crucial partners in channeling funds and recruits. The results were devastating for the Soviets. After a decade of war, more than 1 million Afghans were dead, and Moscow's army was broken. In 1989, the Soviets withdrew. The CYA declared victory. But the story didn't end there. Among the fighters armed and trained during Cyclone were Islamist radicals, who would later form groups like the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Operation Cyclone helped collapse the Soviet Union, but it also lit the fuse for decades of extremism and terror that followed. A triumph in the short term, a curse in the long term. Iran-Contra Affair. The 1980s brought another scandal, this time in Latin America and the Middle East. Congress had banned U.S. support for the Contras, a rebel group fighting Nicaragua's leftist Sandinista government. But the White House still wanted the war, so the CIA and senior officials turned to a covert scheme. They secretly sold weapons to Iran, even though Iran was under embargo and officially an enemy. The profits from those sales were funneled to the Contras. This became the Iran-Contra Affair. When it was exposed in 1986, the scandal rocked Washington. It revealed a shadow government operating outside the law. Key officials were indicted, though most avoided lasting punishment. The Contras received their funding. Iran got weapons, and American credibility took another hit. The Iran-Contra scandal showed how far the U.S. government was willing to bend, even break, its own laws in the name of covert war. Post 9/11. After the September 11th attacks, the CIA entered a new era. Its mission, the global hunt for terrorists. One of the most controversial tools created was extraordinary rendition, a program that allowed the CIA to capture suspects anywhere in the world and transfer them to secret prisons. In these black sites, prisoners were interrogated using what the agency called enhanced techniques. The rest of the world called it torture. Waterboarding, sleep deprivation, stress positions, all carried out in hidden facilities across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. Supporters argued these methods prevented future attacks. Critics pointed out that many detainees were never charged, and some were innocent. The program damaged America's reputation abroad. Allies were complicit. Enemies gained propaganda victories. Extraordinary rendition symbolized the post-9/11 mindset. A war without borders, rules bent in the name of security, and a legacy of controversy still unresolved today. Origins of submarines. Before submarines became symbols of stealth and nuclear power, they were fragile experiments, ideas scribbled on paper and tested in rivers.